What is going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I am here with my second installment for today of topics that I want to discuss. This one comes from Kyle Krabs, obviously somebody that I read a lot of his work to you guys, but also somebody that I don't always agree with. So, but it's an interesting article, and it's centered around the 6 best first-round picks for the Miami Dolphins this century. Right? Okay, so this is interesting. Let's see what he has to say about the 6 best first-round picks for the Dolphins this century. The Miami Dolphins' battle plan to revive the franchise revolves around the NFL draft process. Quick pause there. That's not true. It's partially true. It's not totally true. Because if it was totally true, then they wouldn't have picked up, I think it is, 11 free agents. So they got 11 guys in free agency, but also they wouldn't have not only picked up that many free agents, which is partially building your team, at least like a fifth of your team through free agency, and then also blowing through your cap space to do so, right? So that's not accurate. They partially built through the draft, but they're also clearly intending to partially build through free agency as well. But building with volume and assembling cheap talent, the Dolphins aspire to rebuild their team into a winner sooner rather than later. They certainly aspire to do so. Will it work? We'll have to see. How have the Dolphins drafted in recent memory? If we look back over the stretch of mediocrity the Dolphins have been mired in, we'll find Miami has greatly improved their NFL draft returns already versus what they were getting at the turn of the millennium. That is debatable, and we will debate it a little bit. From 1997 to 2003, the Miami Dolphins made 3 first-round selections: wide receiver Yatil Green in 97, running back John Avery in 98, and cornerback Jamar Fletcher in 01. Over a 6-year span, the Dolphins got 7 total starts from their first-round picks. And that stuff is absolutely accurate, right? Those things are accurate. And so it is true that out of those guys, we didn't get very much. So that is a fact. If you want to know why the bottom dropped out on the Dolphins midway through the 2000s, that's exactly where you need to look. Now, I also agree with that. We haven't been primarily because, and one of the reasons we haven't been a team that primarily builds through the draft is because of Stephen Ross. He thinks that we can just pump money and resources into it, which one of his primary means of doing so has been through free agency, signing big name contracts. And also because they haven't been particularly great at talent evaluation and then development. Now, I personally think in recent memory, and certainly over the past decade, the best examples that we have of them doing the right things were the Adam Gase drafts. Those drafts netted players that have done great things. A few superstars and tons of average or better players that are producing for the teams that they're on. Anyway, the Dolphins attack their roster with an aggressive mentality. That is true, often trading assets for established pro players, such as the deal with the Saints that sent running back Ricky Williams to Miami. But that's part of what I'm talking about. They think that they can just do the most like aggressive, splashy things and that it's going to work out, and it is proven time and time again not to work out. But again, that problem is rooted with our owner, Stephen Ross. The Dolphins ended up dealing a 2002 first-round pick and a 2003 conditional third-round pick that became a first-round pick as well. By 2004 training camp, Williams retired. Hard luck? Yes. But that's also partly because of the stupid philosophy that and rules that the NFL had around marijuana, because in case you don't recall, part of his issues was that he got suspended for smoking weed. So part of the hard luck was the bullshit policies of the NFL, but also an embodiment of how Miami's failure to maximize their early picks resulted in an eroding roster that could not sustain. They could not sustain once they lost a key cog. But who have been the good picks for the Dolphins along the way? Here are 6 of the best picks the Miami Dolphins had made in the first round since the year 2000. He starts with offensive tackle Laramie Tunsil in 2016. So I half agree with his analysis here and half not necessarily disagree, but you just don't know yet. So you can't make the kind of claims that he does, right? Or that people do. So, but let's hear what he has to say. Tunsil was a steal for Miami in 2016. Absolutely agree. The fact that he fell to us was absolutely astounding. Let's also note that part of the reason why the Dolphins didn't have to trade up for a quarterback this year was because they got lucky that the quarterback that they wanted the entire time got hurt. Now think about that. That's not exactly the situation that you want. In Tunsil's case, again, he fell because of smoking marijuana. I'll take that all fucking day. All day. But a player who has serious injuries that falls to you doesn't seem like a good, smart, valuable pick. So again, you know, they lucked out here, and that's why they didn't have, but they did trade away draft capital in this draft by moving up for players that I thought were reaches. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. Let's continue with this. And then a steal again in 2019 when the team flipped him for a king's ransom. Okay, so that's where I push back, because you don't know that. You just don't know that, right? Because let's see, they got, so one of the first round picks, first of all, Kenny Stills was part of that trade. Okay, so it's not 2 first round picks just for Laramie Tunsil. That's ridiculous. Okay, so Kenny Stills was part of that trade, and he's a really good wide receiver, and they got value for him, or they got value out of him, the Texans did. Okay, now, but having said that, 2 first round picks, one of them we don't know yet because it's next year and we haven't actually even picked a player yet, so we don't know if that pick is going to pan out for us because we haven't picked it yet. So it's a ridiculous thing to say that it was worth it when you don't even know what's going to materialize from it. And then with the other one, who did we pick? Well, technically we should have been picking 26th overall, because that was the pick that we got in this year's draft in the first round from the Texans, the 26th overall pick, which became the 30th overall pick after the Dolphins traded back. But then who did they take? They took cornerback Noah Igbinoghene, who, according to a lot of reports, is going to be a slot corner for us. And if you like K Flexen, he says you should never take a slot cornerback in the first round and it's not worth it. And that's why it was good to get rid of Minkah Fitzpatrick, even though we actually drafted Minkah Fitzpatrick to play free safety. Okay, whatever. So, but if you go with that logic, you don't take a first round slot corner. I actually, to some degree, agree with that. But in addition to that, you also don't reach for a corner who doesn't really have necessarily, according to a lot of the experts, a first round draft status. So he's a bit of a reach in that way, but also you have 2 of the top 3 highest paid corners already on your roster, etc., etc., etc. So, but again, to be as fair as possible, we don't even know how that pick pans out. Maybe he ends up being a superstar, right? And then you can say it pans out, but we don't know. So how can you make the claim that it was a steal? Yeah, okay, fine. They got 2 first round picks for him and Stills. But what if those 2 first round picks end up being complete busts? What if Noah Igbinoghene ends up being a complete bust? What if the first round pick that we use next year from that trade ends up being a bust? Which is possible. Is it guaranteed? No. Again, they could be superstars. We'll have to wait and see. I don't agree with those picks. I would have taken safety Xavier McKinney over Noah Igbinoghene. But I'm not the GM. I'm not the people that make those decisions, so they have to prove if it's right. Anyway, let's continue on. Miami got 3 strong years of play out of Tunsil before cashing out their investment and getting 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick in return. Okay, but again, and so the full scope of that, we did also trade them a pick, if I'm not mistaken. It was a later round pick. So we traded Tunsil, Stills, and I believe a later round draft pick for 2 first-round picks and a second. So it's important to keep the full context of the trade, because it's not just, or even if we didn't give I can't remember all of the details off the top of my head, but even if we didn't give that, it was still 2 players. So it's not accurate to just say, oh, we got all of that haul for just the 1 player. That's wrong. It's factually inaccurate. Anyway, but we did absolutely get 3 strong years of play, and he was expected to be our left tackle of the future. But they gave him away for hopes and dreams and a gamble. So they have to prove if it pays out. All right, let's move on. Wide receiver Devontae Parker comes in at number 5. Okay, that's interesting. The 2019 season catapults Parker above Tunsil for obvious reasons, but also helps him edge out cornerback Vontae Davis, who played 3 seasons in Miami and logged 9 interceptions over that span. Okay, I'm going to pause here. Well, let me just finish this. Parker's dominant stretch in 2019 is a promising omen, and if more play of that caliber continues, Parker will be shooting up this board in years to come. Okay, pause for just a quick second. So let's look at that realistically. It took him 5 years to get to that point where he broke out, and he had a great season. Absolutely. On a shit team. No less. Right? So that's good. But if we're being honest, a large part of that is due to the Adam Gase regime for finally getting him to the point where he was eating healthy, had the right practice habits, and that was also in part because of some of the veterans like Frank Gore and Danny Amendola, more in particular, that the old regime brought in to help him work up to that point so he could finally stay healthy and stay on the field to actually produce at that level. So let's keep that in mind as well. But it's kind of funny because he compared him to Vontae Davis here, but if you look at the 5 years of production of Devontae Parker compared to the 3 years of production for Devontae Davis, well, clearly Vontae Davis actually per year had better production than Devontae Parker did. So that's kind of mind-boggling. Also, just because he finally had a breakout year at this point, and there's certainly no guarantee that it's going to continue. There are some reasons for optimism in that regard, sure. But there's no guarantee whatsoever, right? Especially if there doesn't end up being a full season. So, like, just again, like having definitive statements and that saying he's the unquestionably the 5th best first round pick that we've taken is a little odd to me, because I mean, if you just look at the facts, part of why if you look at the facts, it doesn't really warrant it, but then part of his placement is because of projections for the future that hasn't happened yet, that doesn't have a guarantee of turning out in the ways that he wants or expects. I mean, to be fair to him, he says, if more play of that caliber continues. But in his statements, Parker's dominant stretch in 2019 is a promising omen. And if more plays of that caliber continue, Parker will be shooting up this board in years to come. So his statement implies, at least from how I read it, that he expects that to happen, especially with Tua, etc., etc. Okay, whatever. 4 on his list is running back Ronnie Brown in 2005. The team's replacement for Williams struggled with injuries in the heart of his tenure with Miami, but Brown was consistently a 3-down threat and finished his Miami career with over 4,800 rushing yards and 36 rushing touchdowns, both good for 3rd best marks in team history. Now there you go. That's purely just fact-based, and that's a good pick. Right? It's a good pick for this list because it's 100% based on statistics, not projections that you hope might come to pass. Right? And by the way, Minkah Fitzpatrick is a guy who you could have on this list, especially if you're also going to have offensive tackle Laramie Tunsil. Minkah Fitzpatrick he had a great rookie season for us. He balled out for the Steelers after being traded from the Dolphins. So, I mean, like, to not have him or Vontae Davis for that matter on this list and Devontae Parker is weird to me. But Ronnie Brown is a good one because it's purely based off of statistics and there's no projection for the future because Ronnie Brown doesn't play anymore. Anyway, 3 on this list. Quarterback Ryan Tannehill in 2012. Now, all you guys know I'm a huge Ryan Tannehill fan, so I like this. But again, purely based off of statistics. Anyway, Tannehill passed for over 20,000 yards as a member of the Dolphins and quarterbacked the team to a 42-46 record with him behind center. Now, obviously, just pause for a quick second. The record is what most people look at and will clap back at me for and be like, oh, see, he only had a 42-46 record. Yes, but why is that? Why is that? And he actually talks about part of that in a second, which we will get to, and I've talked about a lot. But in addition to that one thing, which we will get to in a second, there were constant changes at coordinator and head coach. The players around him sucked. He didn't have offensive weapons that were fucking good. His offensive line was garbage. He didn't have a defense that could get him the ball back, etc., etc. Okay, his frustrating play in crunch time often left Dolphins fans wanting more. I mean, but that's not actually entirely true. I mean, is he Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady? No. But with what he was given, he did phenomenal things. How many times did Ryan Tannehill stand strong in the fucking pocket, take a big hit, and still connect on a deep pass? A lot, in fact. Quite often. Especially towards the back end of his career with the Dolphins. Why? Because he developed every single year. He constantly posted good numbers. How many times he was exceptionally good on the run. Every time he would break out of the pocket, he was really good, not just running the ball, he was good running the ball. He wasn't Lamar Jackson good, of course, but he was good running the ball, and he wasn't, he's not Patrick Mahomes good, breaking to his left or breaking to his right to extend the play and then throw the ball. He's not as good as any of those quarterbacks in any of those areas, but he's really good at all of those areas. Okay? And so, it's not accurate. He made he just didn't have a good defense or players around him, particularly on the offensive line, to help him out. He's not God, nor is any quarterback. Anyway, so Tannehill is third all-time in passing yards, touchdowns, and completions in team history. Not to mention the myriad of other Dolphins records and the NFL record that he holds. Okay? And he was sacked 248 times in 88 games. 248 times he was sacked in 88 games. Now, to be fair, were some of those occasionally on him? Yes, absolutely. But he proved not to have anywhere near as many, increased mental, problems in the pocket, right? Like he didn't do it all the time. Occasionally he would. My point is like with like Josh Rosen, for example, right? He developed these bad habits because he got so used to being on the run and sacked all the time that he would freeze up in the pocket and shit like that. Tannehill didn't do that. Occasionally he waited a little too long trying to make something happen and would get sacked. But the vast majority of the time, it was because of his offensive line. Now, really quick, just to put that into perspective a little bit, he gives us another stat from one of the most prominent quarterbacks in Dolphins history, the one quarterback that we've apparently, been pushing to replace, and that is Dan Marino. As a point of reference, Dan Marino was sacked 270 times in 242 games. So Dan Marino was only sacked, let's see, that's quick math here, 22 times more than Tannehill in, 160 games? 154 games more. Like, come the fuck on, people. Like, seriously? 22 more sacks Dan Marino had, but he played 154 more games. It was spread out over a way larger time period. That alone proves my point, and that not alone, that in conjunction with the statistics that he constantly put up every single year, with the fact that for the vast majority until his unfortunate knee injury was an Iron Man, constantly fucking stood strong in the pocket, constantly developed each and every single year. etc., etc., etc. So the narrative that Ryan Tannehill is not a good quarterback, or that it was his fault that the Dolphins didn't succeed, or that we had a 42-46 record is just absurd and factually inaccurate. Anyway, continuing on. Then number 2 is Mike Pouncey, okay? And number 1 is offensive tackle Jake Long. I'm not going to go into their descriptions, but I mean, look, Pouncey did have a good career for the Dolphins until we thought, it was time to give up on him and trade him to the Chargers. And look, to be fair, he's still playing for the Chargers from my understanding. I'm pretty sure he's still their center, so he is still playing, although they haven't been particularly the greatest team either. So there is that. But I do understand why Gase and the regime let him go at the time, because he was a substantial price tag and he just came off some pretty serious hip injuries. So it made sense. It hurt and it sucked, especially because I would have loved to see Pouncey retire as a Dolphin, but it did make sense. And he hasn't exactly been a world beater since he left the Dolphins, so it has continued to prove, in my perspective, a wise decision. And then obviously we know Jake Long did some good things for us in his short tenure with us, but look, at this point, they just got to get it right. As I've been saying this entire time, it is prove it time for this organization to get it right. I thought that the firing of Gase was wrong and stupid and unnecessary, and everything that they have done since then, the clearing of the roster, I thought was unnecessary. I thought we were headed in the right direction finally. Obviously, people disagree, and they think that this new regime is the right one. So, #prove it. I want to see it. And until then, I'm going to voice all of my concerns. And, they don't get credit for things that they haven't proven yet. So we'll see how it plays out. Again, finally, to end this, I hope that they do, but they have to prove it, and the data has to show it before they will get the praise and they get the credit. So with that, I'm going to get out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos of perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter @DillonTartaro. And with that, I am out. We'll see y'all soon. Fins up.